Imagine you've been contracted to produce an international cycling event that will be seen worldwide, and days before the race, you're told the course will be completely underwater. My guest on this episode will tell us how he adjusted to this challenge. Plus, we'll find out how in-venue sports productions for the X Games and Formula One differ from what you see at home. Next on Sports in the Making. Thank you so much for listening to Sports in the Making, where we find out about people who work in the sports and broadcasting industry, find out what they do, and how sports comes together. I'm your host, Don Cardona, and this is episode 2. My conversation was recorded in November of 2019. In this episode, my guest is someone I worked with at TVG Games Network during the first couple of years we helped launch it. He was one of the producers that I learned from on how horse racing works and how detailed the industry can be. We talk about how he influenced coverage of the Kentucky Derby, the Preakness, the Belmont Stakes, and the Breeders' Cup with a show called The Works on TVG. How he came to oversee and produce the first ever UCI Cyclocross World Championships in the United States, and how he produces in-venue events for fans attending the X Games and Formula One racing events. And by the way, X Games Aspen happens in a couple of days. So here's my friend, David Loignon. So David, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thanks. I am very honored to be on your show.
So one of the reasons I wanted David on the show is because he brings a different perspective to broadcast sports television, and he works with some of the big players in the industry. And so I wanted to bring him on to give us an idea of how it works. But before we do, David, how did you get into this industry?
Yeah, sure. So, I started off in television news as a producer many years ago. And when I decided to get out of news and go to do something else, I had this kind of funny background where I knew how to do television and lived and worked in Louisville, Kentucky, home of the Kentucky Derby. I had, over the years of working for the ABC affiliate there, come to know and really love horse racing kind of from the inside out, not so much as a bettor, but from a fan of the horses and the horsemen. About that time, or close to it, I started hearing about this potential horse racing network, TVG Games Network, TVG. And so I just, put my stuff out there, applied, and ended up starting working there. So that was really my first foray into TVG, was really the first, big step all the way into the sporting world.
Now with TVG, it was a new concept at the time where we would broadcast horse racing around the country and you could wager from home via a set-top box. Did you think that would ever have a chance of making it?
Well, for those of us who had been involved in horse racing already, we kind of felt it was a no-brainer. And honestly, the horse racing industry has essentially been a theory or a belief over the last several decades that, horse racing's decline as an American pastime type sport, which it used to be back in the 40s and 50s and so on. That decline began as sports went to television, and the theory within horse racing was that, well, if we put it on television, then we lose the wagering aspect, which is how horse racing has always made money. So they kind of held back from television, which is generally believed that began the decline of television. So those of us who were part of horse racing felt like, well, here's our chance. Let's get on TV, and we can bring the wagering element along with it. So we have both halves of what people thought it needed to succeed or to grow the sport.
Now at TVG, it was a little bit unusual because now you're having to blend not just the wagering and coverage of the sport, but entertainment. What kinds of things did you do as a producer at TVG that would make it entertaining so people would want to watch?
Yeah, honestly, I think there's one big thing I'm still, extremely proud of, was creating a show called The Works. And that came from my love of horse racing, again, not as a betting person, not as a wagerer, but the love of the competition of the sport. And that was because I had spent years, every year leading up to the Kentucky Derby. One of the other TVG reporters, Jeff Liss, and I, who had worked together at the affiliate in Louisville and really loved going to what they call the backside, which is where the barns are and the horsemen are. And every morning, all of the activity happens there on the backside of a racetrack. Nothing happens in the stands. There's no wagering. But all of those horses that compete in the afternoon train in the morning. It's practice, if you will, as you would compare it to another sport. And we knew that that was the heartbeat and the competitive side and the story-filled side and the colorful side and the interesting side of horse racing that really was not being told. And so, we sat in my office one night in Los Angeles and kind of dreamed up what we called Daytona's Speed Week, but for horse racing, surrounding Churchill Downs and the Kentucky Derby, the build up to the Kentucky Derby. And I think that show is still an integral part now of Derby coverage of more than just Television Games Network, and Breeders' Cup and all those things. It's now rolled more, and it's kind of expected that you're going to cover that side of it.
Right.
But it's what Jeff and I fell in love with of horse racing. It wasn't the gambling side. And so it was, I think anytime you see that there's something interesting and exciting and colorful and has a lot of depth to it. Anytime you can bring that to viewers, there's a good chance you're going to be successful, because what, you and a few other people get an inside look at and find, really interesting, chances are other people out there are going to find that interesting too. And I think that transfers to any sport when you can find that interest level that people don't get a chance to see on a daily basis.
Right. And that's part of the reason I wanted to start this podcast, is to show people that there's so much that goes into a sporting event that we see on TV, or even an event in general. And I remember, when I started at TVG, I didn't know anything about horse racing at all. I was brought on as a director. I think the thing that did save me, though, was when I was in college, a good friend of mine's name is Tom Vanberg. And his grandfather is a Hall of Fame trainer, and so is his dad now, who just recently passed away. But that was my first knowledge of horse racing. So I get to TVG, and I'm trying to figure all this out, because not only do you have to know the jockeys and the horses and the trainers, you need to know all the history of where that horse came from. How are you able to help people understand how important those bloodlines are?
I think... And with the start of TVG, I think it was great that we had a blend of people that both did know horse racing and did not know horse racing, because the people who do know horse racing have to bring, the facts and the understanding and the background and the knowledge of a sport to that programming. But the people who don't know that sport, in this case horse racing, also have to keep those people that do know it honest in the, hey, you're not going to attract anybody but the hardcore fan if you can't relate the sport beyond just the hardcore nuts and bolts of it. So I think that's part of what eventually made TVG, or helped TVG become successful, is it was a good mix of people who did and did not know the sport.
Right.
Those who did not, they knew television, so they knew good stories. They knew delivering, how to deliver content and make it interesting. And you got to have that mix of people. And I think that's with any sport. I mean, when I started, we haven't talked about this, but I work in F1. And when I started with F1, I didn't know anything about Formula One. I literally started learning just by watching the races and reading a book called Formula One for Dummies. I swear to God. But now I'm a super fan of Formula One. But I think that sometimes you need to have some brand new eyes to understand what's, to pull out of a sport what might be interesting that, other people take for granted because they spend 24/7 around it. So just like with horse racing and bloodlines and the backside and working out in the morning and how to place a trifecta wager, how to do a part wheel, all those things, I think you have to have people that understand how to bring that to the screen, whatever type of screen it is, and make it relatable.
Right. And in relation to TVG, horse racing, and your F1 now, which is where I was going to transition eventually, is as a TV producer or somebody in television, you're a sports fan at heart, but you also have to understand that it's not just the core sports that we grow up here in the U.S. with, football, basketball, baseball, and hockey. You have to be able to adapt to whatever's presented. And I think, part of the challenge with that is it's not the television aspect, it's understanding the sport so that you can relate it to your audience. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. You have to. I mean, I there's a reason I bought that book, Formula One for Dummies, is because I didn't want to start presenting. You have to be careful not to offend the people that already follow the sport at the same time losing the interest of the people who don't. There's always a happy medium. There's always a struggle. There's always a pull. I mean, you remember what it was like when we first started at TVG, the hate mail we would get because we were too funny sometimes or too
Right.
goofy, or these were hardcore fans, and you can't offend them, or you have to try not to offend them. But at some, to some extent, you have to drag them along into the, if you want this sport to gain a wider audience, which is, why else is there sports coverage? Do we broadcast sports? Is to grow our audience.
Especially with horse racing, where it's a very traditional way of doing things, and resistance to change is probably a big factor in that, more so than trying to be entertaining.
Absolutely. And again, I'm seeing the same thing in Formula One, which, as we talked about earlier, Formula One was purchased, I want to say 4 years ago, from a British company basically run by a single person who had run Formula One for the last several decades. And it was purchased by a company called Liberty Media, which is a U.S. media company. And already we've seen in the last several years a transition within that sport. Formula One was a sport that didn't even embrace social media up until 2 years ago, if you can believe it or not. Yeah. I mean, the Bernie Ecclestone, the man who was in charge of Formula One, had publicly said he did not believe that social media was relevant in Formula One just maybe 4 or 5 years ago. He said that. But at the same time, Formula One was losing audience in some places and almost non-existent in the United States anymore. It had very, very little fan base. And Liberty Media has basically done an about face in terms of understanding that to grow the sport, you have to make it relatable. You have to respect the traditions. You have to honor the traditions. You have to understand the history. But you also have to keep it real and relevant for new people who, may walk up and spend 5 minutes watching and go, yeah, that's boring. I don't understand what's interesting there. So there's always that happy medium of, honoring the tradition and, not offending the knowledgeable fans, but being able to bring new fans in without, making them feel stupid.
Right. So I want to delve into F1 in just a little bit, but before we get there, when you left TVG, you went to Churchill Downs in their simulcast productions. What did you do there?
I basically, they had their on track, their wagering program, which is what people who are at the track use to watch to make a lot of their wagering, and is distributed throughout the country and even throughout the world. They had an outside company that was managing all that, and they decided to take it internal. So in doing that, I became responsible for the simulcast program, that television signal, if you were, for all of their tracks around the country, as well as some outside tracks that they did not own, but who had contracted them to do that work for them. So basically, I was in charge of a mobile television production company, for lack of a better explanation.
So Big Red Kong is your company, and you do television production and production management. What kinds of things do you work on?
So as we talked about before, I produce the on-site big screen productions for a couple of Formula One races, the one here in the United States and the one in Mexico City. I have done multiple other types of motorsports that kind of sprung out of doing that, like MotoGP and World Endurance Challenge, and Moto America, which is a US-based motorcycle race series. I also do the same sort of thing, big screen production, in-venue production for X Games, and both the summer and winter. We call them now Minneapolis and Aspen, so it's based on the city. And then I do a lot of other smaller productions for people, corporate business. Recently, my friend of mine and I went in together on a professional level drone, so now I'm doing drone video for productions, including I did for X Games this past summer in Minneapolis. That kind of runs the gambit too. So
right. Okay, so let's talk about some of these more interesting events. 2013 UCI Cyclocross World Championships in Louisville, Kentucky.
Yes.
First, what goes into that? Second, how do you produce it? And third, what goes into the whole packaging of it?
So that was a really interesting, and I've been asked that question, how did you end up producing this, by a ton of people? And the answer is very simple. The answer is that they decided to hold the World Cyclocross Championships outside of Europe for the first time in the history of the sport. And the city that had lobbied to try and make that happen was Louisville, Kentucky. I was a cyclocross racer, so I understood the sport pretty much backwards and forwards and followed it at a professional level. And I lived in Louisville, Kentucky, and I knew the people who were trying to bring the first ever world championships to the United States. So all those things together, there really was nobody else possibly in the United States as qualified.
It was a perfect storm
to do that. It was super random, but it worked out perfectly for me. And I'm so grateful because that's probably the proudest accomplishment of my broadcast career is that I was the producer for that event, which has only been held once outside of Europe.
Right. And I remember seeing that coming into our facility at Universal Sports. And I just remember there was a lot of rain.
It was, yes, the Ohio River, which the course was in a park that is along the Ohio River in Louisville, Kentucky. And the championships were set to go over 2 days, a Saturday and a Sunday, 2 races on Saturday and 2 races on Sunday. And 2 days before that Saturday, so on Thursday, we were told by the Corps of Engineers that the park would be underwater by Sunday.
Oh, nice.
Yes. And it was, in fact, underwater by Sunday. So we ended up having to change what was going to be 2 races in one day and 2 races other to 4 races on a single day, which changed everything. And you're talking about an event that's never been covered by television in the United States, period, ever, at any level, let alone the World Championships, which in the United States was, again, even now cyclocross is, it has its cult following. It is a growing sport, but over in places like Belgium and Norway and, even France and Germany and places like that, it is baseball. It is soccer. It is that high level and that, it's that important. So our production wasn't just going to the United States. It literally went across the world to a lot of places who really cared about it a lot more than the audience here in the United States did.
And I see, at Universal Sports, we would bring that in and I'd see it from all over the world too. But it's challenging. In fact, I don't know how you guys did it for the US audience, but I know that when it gets sent out, when we take it in, it's raw. Like the announcers are talking and they don't care that you have commercial breaks. So we would be in the control room trying to find a place to go to commercial break.
Yep.
And then we would have to pick up, like if it was live, we would have to come back with just the Nats and then try and listen for a pause. And some of those guys just keep talking. So you just kind of have to fade it up gradually.
Well, and we had a set of world feed announcers, but the vast majority of people who were taking our feed were basically just taking it without the world feed announcers and were
calling it themselves.
In fact, we had a truck basically that was like 10 announcer booth setups that we fed into. So a lot of the countries would send their announcers over to us, and then we just feed back to their country, but then through that truck so that they were watching. And everybody's taking commercial breaks whenever they wanted to. It had nothing to do with us. So we had to produce just a straight, like you said, straight world feed that everybody could use. And that's how Formula One is too. Formula One does the same thing.
Yeah. How do you feel like you need to approach an event that is going to be seen by millions and millions of eyeballs outside the U.S.? Do you approach it any different, or is it just business as usual?
Again, it's with everything. You have to understand the sport, pay respect to, where it comes from and what people think is important. I don't think you can go in and cover a sport and not have at least core members of a team who not just know somewhat, but love the sport. I think if you try and do any sport, you're going to fall short if you don't have, like I said, at least some core members on that team. And obviously that was a sport that I loved and followed. And not a single other person on my crew, not one single person on my crew beyond myself and the director who we brought over from Belgium had ever seen a cyclocross race before, let alone been on part of a production. So it was a ton of educating and teaching and some really important rehearsing. But yeah, I think you have to approach it with a respect and a love for the sport, or you're just not going to get it right. And people they're going to see that very quickly.
And I would venture to guess that those people that you worked with on the crew probably became fans after they saw what it was, right?
Yeah, no, I think absolutely some of them, and Louisville, believe it or not, is actually, in terms of U.S. cities where cyclocross is popular, is easily one of the top 4 or 5 cities in the country. So it's remained popular at least a semi-pro level there, and they've continued to have like national championships there and things like that. So it continues to be popular there. But the other thing in terms of, and this goes for Formula One, this goes for the Cyclocross World Championships. You cannot assume that you know it all, and I have never gone into a brand new sport at a national or international level and not been willing to go to some place where it's being produced and covered, regularly, and sit in and watch what they do. We went to the World Championships the year before, which was in Belgium, and connected with their television production people and sat in their truck and walked the course and saw how they laid out their cameras and saw how they did the production. With Formula One, before the first race here in Austin, we went to the UK and we went to the race at Silverstone, and we, embedded with their production people and watched how they did the race, and we walked the course and we saw how they did everything. And I think you have to be willing to, even if you want to do things differently, and I've always tried to add my own spin, but I think you have to understand at a base level how it's done and what the fans expect at least a base level.
Right. Okay, we're almost to F1, but you also cover events for the X Games,
Yes.
ESPN. It's a different kind of producing for television, from what I understand. Could you explain how that works?
Yeah, so with X Games, I produce one of the producers for the in-venue production. So instead of our end product going to screens around the world or around the country in people's homes, our product goes to the giant screens within the venue.
So if I attend the event, I'm actually seeing and hearing everything that you're producing.
That's correct. And it's very much the same as producing for television, only it's very different in the goals that you have, the audience that you have, and what you're trying to accomplish. Generally in sports, there is a core production of the sport itself. There are cameras pointed at the track or the field or the court or whatever it is, and they are producing coverage of the actual sports competition itself. And that is a program feed that then can be distributed to multiple places. One of those is usually, as in X Games, it's to television, it's to ESPN, and they have a set of hosts and announcers and reporters and features and sponsors and all of those elements that go into creating what you watch when you sit at home and watch X Games coverage. Well, we get that same core feed. We take it into our production truck, and we have our own announcers, our own reporters, our own production elements, our own features, all the things that you would see in television, but they're aimed at a slightly different target, which is making sure that we're keeping the energy level up within the venue.
Which is a reciprocal effect in that you're producing for the crowd in the stadium or in venue, which will then be seen by the networks so that it looks like there's excitement, which of course there should be, right?
There is, and it is very much our job to keep the crowd energized and enthusiastic, so that when the cameras are covering the fans for more than just the reaction to what just happened on a competition, but within the venue itself, we're showing the level of excitement that exists there. We're allowing people to see what it's like to be at the event and that energy. But when television goes to a feature about the guy who hurt himself 2 years ago and they didn't think he was going to come back, and he's made it back to finally compete 2 years later, that's a wonderful story. But if you play that story in the live venue, when you come back to the live competition at the end of the story, everybody's going to be like, oh,
what a letdown.
And you don't want that. I mean, it's a good story, but you can't let the audience within the venue, you can't allow that energy to drop down like that. So we're doing a different kind of feature, or we've got our hype squad out doing some goofy contests with fans, or we're talking to a couple of the competitors, or we're doing something that keeps the energy level up within the venue, so that when TV comes back from that wonderful feature that you watched at home, that come back to a stadium that's full of cheering and applauding and energetic fans, and that excitement's still there. It hasn't died in the minute and a half of the that the feature's been playing at home.
What's the biggest challenge in putting something like that on, both winter and summer X Games?
I think it's really coming up with new and innovative ways to engage the crowd. And that's because, especially with X Games, X Games it used to be X Games summer and winter. Now it's X Games named by the city. So our Winter Olympics is X Games Aspen. It's not X Games Winter, it's X Games Aspen. And our summer, the games that we have in the summer, they're based in Minneapolis, so it's X Games Minneapolis. And if and when it moves to a different city, it'll be X Games whatever that city is. So what you end up getting is a very repeat crowd. A lot of the same people who love action sports are going to come back to X Games in that city every year because it's right there in their city. So keeping things new and exciting and different and changing things up, not only on a sport level, but what you do in between those, the sports, the competitions. If you just do the same thing you did last year, why come back the third year?
Right.
And why be excited while I'm there? So I honestly think that's the biggest challenge of in-venue production.
There's got to be a lot of coordination that happens, not just with you and the X Games, which is kind of its own property within ESPN, but the broadcast side of it too. How is that formulated?
It's imperative. You cannot do it without a lot of cooperation on both sides. We have meetings essentially and TV is really the driver. Because let's face it, TV is the revenue source for the, there's a lot of tickets sold to X Games, but they don't match the revenue from sponsorship on television. So TV is definitely the driver. We've actually started having meetings for X Games Aspen, which is the end of January. And we're talking to TV. They're sharing their production plans. They're sharing their rundowns all along. And we're building our show based on what they're planning on doing from a television standpoint. And that continues to be refined and honed all the way down to the week of. And then week of, we will have meetings on site where we'll walk through each competition and talk about how it's going to develop, how it's going to, what's the format for the comp, because the format changes from year to year. When are we expecting to take commercial breaks? How are we going to finish this up? And who's talking to who? There's you have to be able to listen to 20 different people on a headset at the same time, all talking about different things and recognizing voices during this, or your head will explode.
Yeah, no, I hear you there.
And I'm sure you've been through it too. It's like you're constantly listening. But again, as the in-venue, you have to let TV drive the show and then react to where they're going and what's happening. You may have planned, pieces X, Y, Z, elements, ABC, whatever it is at certain points. But in live competition, things change, and you always have to be able to react to that. So TV reacts to what changes within the competition, and then you react to how TV is changing, so that you still keep a cohesive show together. And it's lots of talking. It's crazy and it's hectic. And that's the thing probably I will always love most about live television is it's always crazy. And I've done 8-hour broadcasts where I've not sat down an entire time.
Or eaten or taken a drink.
Yeah, yes. And I get done with it, and you get done with it, and you're exhausted, and you look back and you go, wow, that was fun.
What just happened?
Yeah.
Who won?
Right. But that's what I love about live television. That's what when I started in live news, it wasn't the newscast you had prepared and everything went exactly as you planned. It was the one that you got, 10 minutes before you went on the air. There was live breaking news. You threw the rundown out the window, and you just flew by the seat of your pants. Well, that's live sports to an extent all the time, because if we knew what the outcome of live sports was going to be, we probably wouldn't do it, or I'd be betting on it.
And it's once you get TV, at least TV sports, from my perspective, I don't know how you feel. Once you get that in your blood, it's hard to get it out. I've been away from it full time for the last 10 months, and you start to go through a little bit of withdrawals. But it's something that is so interesting, and I get questions all the time. What's it like working in a TV truck? What's it like working on this event? Or what was it like when you did this? How do you guys communicate? How do you manage all those kinds of things? And again, that's why I wanted to start this type of podcast, is just to let people know that it's a huge undertaking to make an event appear on TV.
It's a big dance, and it's like anything else. When you're learning how to dance, you don't learn by doing the most complex steps out there. You learn by doing the simple ones, and then those become easy. So you pick up another, couple of moves, and then those become easy. When you're doing television, you're starting out simple and building on that, and hopefully the other people that you work with are doing that too, so that complex dance of communication and all the things that happen within a television truck during live sports is just a lot of it's second nature to people, and that's when you get a crew together like that. That's when it's a lot of fun, because
Right.
everybody kind of holds their weight up, and is collaborative and is contributing. And yeah, there's a lot of yelling sometimes, but with the good people, everybody knows that sometimes yelling is just how you have to be heard above the rest of the voices, and it doesn't mean anything. And
At the end of the day, everybody's a friend.
Yeah, it's exactly right. And if you're not working with a crew like that, it's not going to last very long.
Right. Speaking of which, how big are your crews, and how do you find the people for the right fit for what you do?
With X Games, I joined that through because of my work at the Formula One track here in Austin. X Games came to Austin for Summer X Games Austin, while I was already there, and so they pulled me in to start working with them, which was great. But that is the X Games unit within ESPN, as you pointed out, is kind of a separate silo to an extent, but it's a very much a long-term family. I mean, the people who have been working X Games have been working it some of them almost since X Games started, and grew up at X Games, started as production assistants, and now are running X Games. So that's an event for me there's very little turnover. Once every 3 or 4 years, a key person will not be available when it happens, and so they'll find somebody new, and then those people get, like me, I got sucked in 7 years ago. And I when they left Austin and went to Minneapolis and said, "You're coming, right, David?" And I was like, "Thank you for letting me stay part of this family."
Right.
But it's one of those things where you gain more responsibility as you go, but it's very much a family group. I love working for X Games because it's the first major production I've been part of where if you go to somebody in a different department and say, "Hey, this is really difficult, but we need to try and do this." Usually the response is, "Let's figure out how to do that," versus "I can't do that." And that's one of the things I've always loved about X Games is that kind of, we're all part of the same team. I'm not this department and I don't care about yours. So that's been really fun with X Games. And with Formula One, it's probably closer to why I decided to go out on my own, is because at this point in my life and career, I know a lot of people that I like working with and I trust. So I was able to bring those people in to be part of that crew for F1, so that we had a good space to be collaborative and try something new and create something new. So it's different with each element or each event.
And I'm glad you took me there, because that's where I ultimately wanted to be, was with F1. How did something like that happen? Is there a lot of negotiation that goes into being the production provider for that? How do you monetize something like that, and how do you make something like that happen?
It's, again, very much like the cyclocross. It's one of those things where sometimes you're in the right place at the right time, but the connections that you make in this business are everything. Again, I'd worked at Churchill Downs for years, running all of their production for all of their tracks around the country. The man who was the president at Churchill Downs was hired to become the president at Circuit of the Americas, which is the Formula One track in the United States based in Austin. He came down here he knew he needed a large group of the top level of his employees to be very familiar with large events like the Kentucky Derby. So he basically went through Churchill Downs and hired away about 15 people from Churchill Downs. We all moved down here to Austin, and we put on the first Formula One race in 20 years in the United States, and it's still going on now. And then subsequently, one of the marketing people in Austin was hired to be the head of marketing when Mexico restarted their F1 lineage, which was 5 years ago, their first return to Formula One racing. And he knew I had, knew how to start up a Formula One production. So he was like, "Hey, David, can you come do ours for us?" So it really is very much who you know and what you've done that will lead mostly to the next big thing you get to be part of.
It is who you know, but if you can't do the job and you can't do it consistently, you're not going to do it again.
It's absolutely that. You work with good people, they do a good job, you want to work with them again, and that's that's no different than any other industry, is finding people that you can count on to do a good job and that you enjoy working with. At this point in my career, I don't want to work with people I don't like hanging around with, because I've done this for too long. I don't need to do that.
Right. Well, somebody who might have an interest in working in broadcast television or even sports in general, what can you tell them on how to break that shell? Because I don't think a lot of people understand how it happens or how they can control their own destiny in certain respects in getting it into the industry.
It's the same thing it's always been. When I started out in television news, which is what gave me my base for understanding how to produce a show regardless of what the content is, I started out as an intern, and I did everything I possibly could to learn all the new stuff. And I just I didn't just stick with the things they gave me. I went above and beyond and did things on my own. Lo and behold, somebody calls in sick one day and they need somebody to be a camera op. So you pick up a camera and you shoot blue video, and then you go back and white balance and shoot non-blue video. But it's really
you took me back there.
And that's a true story. Yeah, it's a true story. But it's this hard work and being willing to start at the bottom and do everything and anything, and to do such a good job that the people above you recognize your work ethic and your willingness to do whatever it takes. Not in a bad way, in a good way, to do a good job no matter what. They will generally give you the chance to take the next step, to do, to fill into that spot. There's always going to be somebody who moves on. There's always going to be a spot that's open above you. And if you're the person that has shown, the willingness to learn and work hard and, learn from your mistakes, generally you're going to get the chance to fill in that spot. It's a combination of that. And if you look at my career, I've really made a career out of taking things that I know and love and putting them on television. That's how I got into horse racing. That's how I got the Cyclocross World Championship. Those things led to Formula One and X Games. While I wasn't an X Games, an action sport, or Formula One expert, they in turn led to me getting opportunities to do something else.
Again, I'll revisit this. We talk about the big four sports that people always want to work on, because really that's what drives the sports industry here on television. It's expanding now, but there are so many opportunities for people if they want to focus in a different sport, UCI or track and field or esports now. There's so many sports and so many avenues on which to do it. When you're producing a sport outside of the country, is that any different than what we do here?
It really isn't. I'm very fortunate that the director that I work with for Formula One here in the United States is bilingual and speaks Spanish. He's a good friend. And so, it was super logical when we went to Mexico. If I'm going to do it, I'm taking him with me. Not only is he a great director, but he is bilingual. And, outside of the United States, as I'm sure being bilingual and speaking English is a lot more prevalent than us speaking other languages here in the United States.
Right.
So between the two, language can sometimes be a bit of an obstacle, but if you're just a little bit smart about it, sport is sport. Television cameras are television cameras. What makes a good story makes a good story, no matter what country it's in.
Right. So now with television everywhere, accessibility on your phone, on your iPad, wherever you may be, is that changing the landscape at all for not only the coverage or how it's produced, but in the way audiences perceive the product?
Well, I think it doesn't change the core of that people still want to watch a sporting event, regardless of whether it's their 50-inch television or their, 6-inch television that is their phone, or their, 15-inch television that is their computer. Those are all still television screens. They're just used for different things aside from being a television screen. So I think the core of coverage of a live sporting event does really remain the same. The building of interest in a sport is now a much different world where you're having to produce content outside of that core live sports coverage to keep engaging fans constantly, whether it's on Instagram and one of the areas I'm responsible for. We have a hype team that basically does in venue contests and fan engagement and sponsor activation within the venue. That's all part of that big screen experience. So they're not only creating that content for the big screen, they're constantly creating content for the handheld device through Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat and all of those social media platforms. While the event is going on live, they're not only part of the content on the big screen, they're pushing out content to the small screens. It is evolving in that regard, but I do think the core coverage of a sporting event does still remain what it almost has always been. It's just developed, we look a lot better now when we're in HD. So
now, before we started talking, you had mentioned a company called Game Changer. What is it that they do?
They do in-venue gaming. So the shuffle game that they play on the big screen where you put a ball under, a Dunkin' Donuts sponsored 3 cups and the cups shuffle around and then everybody says it's under 3 and they yell it, or the contestant has to pick which under to win a prize. Well, we do games like that, but they're connected to your mobile phone within the app for the venue. So you're watching the cups shuffle around on the screen, and then when they finish shuffling on your mobile phone, if you're in the app for the game, it says which one is it under, 1, 2, or 3. Well, you press 1, 2, or 3 on your phone, and if you're correct, you win a coupon from Dunkin' Donuts. So, but it's very much tied to sponsorship because sponsors want to get into the mobile devices of the fans. They're no longer just want to make an impression. They want an actual connection with the fans. So we're giving away prizes through people's mobile phones that keep them connected to the sponsor after they leave the venue through games that they play within the venue.
All right, as we wrap up our time here together, what would you like people to know about what you do and how it affects the viewer at home or even in the venue?
I think the important thing to realize is that you always have to be thinking about and understanding and knowing who your audience is. Again, like I said, with a television program that's going, to the traditional at-home program, you've got one type of audience. With an in-venue program, you have a different type of audience looking for something different. And it's not sustainable to not constantly be trying to understand and provide what's going to keep that audience engaged, regardless of where they are, whether they're in the venue or at home. And the other thing is this is an industry that is so collaborative, and you bring so many different people with different skill sets and different backgrounds and different experiences. It works best when that is really appreciated and embraced, and the people who are putting the program together really allow that kind of collaboration to happen. I think that's what makes the best program, regardless of where it's going.
What's the biggest challenge you've ever had in your television career?
A river taking over the course. But honestly, by far. I mean, I've had trucks catch on fire twice in my career. Those were easier to solve than the venue at which you're going to be producing this program to the world is going to be underwater in 72 hours. So figure something else out.
And those are the types of stories that you hope never get told until it's in a venue like this.
Yeah, exactly. But you know what? It's that collaborative nature where everybody comes together that I'm talking about, people working together, and you don't say, well, that can't be done. You say, okay, let's figure out how to do it. And you get to look back and have a beer afterwards and go, wow, we actually made that happen. And that's pretty cool.
All right, David. Well, I appreciate your time. It's great to catch up with you again, and best of luck with Big Red Kong and everything that you have coming forward towards you.
Yeah, absolutely. Best of luck with this show. I can't wait to listen to others after this, and I appreciate that you had me on. I'm really grateful.
Again, thanks to David Loignon of Big Red Kong Productions for joining us. And as we found out, sports production is not just what's broadcast on your television set. It could be anywhere. It's given the fans the ability to enjoy sports through the medium, and a lot of coordination goes into making it the best it can be. So the next time you're attending the X Games or watching a Formula One race in person, or in any venue in which you happen to be watching, hopefully you'll have a better idea of everything that goes into it. On the next episode of Sports in the Making podcast, have you ever wondered what it's like working inside the television broadcast truck during an NFL broadcast? I talk with John Howard, the technical director on NBC's Sunday Night Football telecast, one of the highest rated shows on TV. We'll talk about his process, how every button he pushes is seen internationally by football fans, and what his role will be in next month's Super Bowl 54. That's on the next episode of Sports in the Making. If you like this episode, be sure to like it and share it on your social media channels, and feel free to review this episode. Also be sure to subscribe to Sports in the Making so you don't miss out on more episodes. If there is something that you would like to know more of in sports, drop me a line on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. You can also visit sportsinthemaking.com to catch up on previous episodes. I'm your host, Don Cardona. Thank you for listening to Sports in the Making.